Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and One Night. Now, when it was the 618th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Judar, as he was making the circuit, suddenly saw his friend Abd al-Samad also circumambulating, and when the Mahagribi caught sight of him, he saluted him and asked him of his state, whereupon Judar wept and told him all that had befallen him. So the Moor carried him to his lodging and entreated him with honour, clothing him in a dress of which the like was not, and saying to him, Thou hast seen the end of thine ills, O Judar. Then he drew out for him a geometric figure, which showed what had befallen Salim and Salam, and said to Judar, Such and such things have befallen thy brothers, and they are now in the king of Egypt's prison. But thou art right, welcome to abide with me, and accomplish thine ordinances of pilgrimage, and all shall be well. Replied Judar, O my lord, let me go and take leave of the merchant with whom I am, and after I will come back to thee. Dost thou owe money? Asked the Moor. And he answered, No. Said Abd al-Samad, Go thou and take leave of him, and come back forthright, for bread hath claims of its own from the ingenious. So Judar returned to the merchant, and farewelled him, saying, I have fallen in with my brother. Go bring him here, said the merchant, and we will make him an entertainment. But Judar answered, saying, He hath no need of that, for he is a man of wealth, and hath many servants. Then the merchant gave Judar 20 dinars, saying, Acquit me of responsibility. And he bade him adieu, and went forth from him. Presently he saw a poor man, so he gave him the 20 ducats, and returned to the Moor, with whom he abode till they had accomplished the pilgrimage rites, when Abd al-Samad gave him the seal ring that he had taken from the treasure of al-Sharmadal, saying, This ring will win thy wish, for it enchanteth, and hath a servant by name al-Rahad al-Kasif. So whatsoever thou hast in mind of your wants in the world, rub this ring, and its servant will appear, and do all thou biddest him. Then he rubbed the ring before him, whereupon the Jinni appeared, saying, Adsum, O my lord, ask what thou wilt, and it shall be given thee. Hast thou the mind to people a ruined city, or ruin a populous one? To slay a king, or to rout a host? O Ra'ad, said Abd al-Samad, this is become thy lord. Do thou serve him faithfully. Then he dismissed him, and said to Judar, Rub the ring, and the servant will appear. And do thou command him to do whatsoever thou desirest, for he will not gainsay thee. Now go to thine own country, and take care of the ring, for by means of it thou wilt baffle thine enemies, and be not ignorant of its puissance. O my lord, quoth Judar, with thy leave I will set out homewards. Quoth the Maghribi, Summon the Jinni, and mount upon his back, and if thou say to him, Bring me to my native city this very day, he will not disobey thy commandment. So he took leave of Moor Abd al-Samad, and rubbed the ring, whereupon al-Rahad presented himself, saying, Adsum, ask, and it shall be given to thee. Said Judar, Carry me to Cairo this day. And he replied, Thy will be done. And taking him on his back, flew with him from noon till midnight, when he set him down in the courtyard of his mother's house, and disappeared. Judar went in to his mother, who rose weeping, and greeted him fondly, and told him how the king had beaten his brothers, and cast them into gaol, and taken the 2 pairs of saddlebags, with which he heard it was no light matter to him. And he said to her, Grieve not for the past. I will show thee what I can do, and bring my brothers hither forthright. So he rubbed the ring, whereupon its servant appeared, saying, Here am I, ask, and thou shalt have. Quoth Judar, I bid thee bring me my 2 brothers from the prison of the king. So the Jinni sank into the earth, and came not up, but in the midst of the gaol, where Salim and Salim lay in piteous plight, and sore sorrow for the plagues of prison, so that they wished for death. And one of them said to the other, By Allah, O my brother, affliction is longsome upon us. How long shall we abide in this prison? Death would be relief. As he spoke, behold, the earth clove in sunder, and came out al-Ra'ad, who took both up and plunged them into the earth. They swooned away for excess of fear, and when they recovered, they found themselves in their mother's house, and saw Judar seated by her side. Quoth he, I salute you, my brothers. You have cheered me by your presence. And they bowed their heads and burst into tears. Then said he, Weep not, for it was Satan, and covetous that led you to do thus. How could you sell me? But I comfort myself with the thought of Joseph, whose brothers did with him even more than ye did with me, because they cast him into a pit. And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 619th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Judar said to his brothers, How could you do this with me? But repent unto Allah and crave pardon of him, and he will forgive you both, for he is the most forgiving, the merciful. As for me, I pardon you and welcome you. No harm shall befall you. Then he comforted them and set their hearts at ease, and related to them all he had suffered, till he fell in with Sheikh Abd al-Samad, and told them also of the seal ring. They replied, O our brother, forgive us this time, and if we return to our old ways, do with us as thou wilt. Quoth he, No harm shall befall you, but tell me what the king did with you. Quoth they, They beat us and threatened us with death, and took the 2 pairs of saddlebags from us. Will he not care? Said Judar, and rubbed the ring, whereupon Al-Ra'ad appeared. When his brothers saw him, they were affrighted, and thought Judar would bid him slay them. So they fled to their mother, crying, O our mother, we throw ourselves on your generosity. Do thou intercede for us, O our mother. And she said to them, O my sons, fear nothing. Then said Judar to the servant, I command thee to bring me all that is in the king's treasury of goods and such. Let nothing remain, and fetch the 2 saddlebags he took from my brothers. I hear, and I obey, replied Al-Ra'ad, and disappearing straightway gathered together all he found in the treasury, and returned with the 2 pairs of saddlebags, and the deposits therein, and laid them before Judar, saying, O my lord, I have left nothing in the treasury. Judar gave the treasure to his mother, bidding her keep it, and laying the enchanted saddlebags before him, said to the Jinni, I command thee to build me this night a lofty palace, and overlay it with liquid gold, and furnish it with magnificent furniture, and let not the day dawn ere thou be quit of the whole work. Replied he, Thy bidding shall be obeyed, and sank into the earth. Then Judar brought forth food, and they ate, and took their ease, and lay down to sleep. Meanwhile, Al-Rahad summoned his attendant Jinn, and bade them build the palace. So some of them fell to hewing stones, and some to building, whilst others plastered and painted and furnished, nor did the day dawn ere the ordinance of the palace was complete. Whereupon Al-Ra'ad came to Judar and said to him, O my lord, the palace is finished and in best order, and it pleased thee to come and look on it. So Judar went forth with his mother and brothers, and saw a palace whose like there was not in the whole world, and it confounded all minds with the goodliness of its ordinance. Judar was delighted with it while he was passing along the highway, and withal it cost him nothing. Then he asked his mother, Say, wilt thou take up thine abode in this palace? And she answered, I will, O my son, and called down blessings upon him. Then he rubbed the ring, and bade the Jinni fetch him 40 handsome white handmaids, and 40 black damsels, and as many Mamelukes and negro slaves. They will be done, answered Al-Ra'ad, and betaking himself with 40 of his attendant genies to Hind and Sind and Persia, snatching up every beautiful girl and boy they saw, till they had made up the required number. Moreover, he sent other 80 who fetched comely black girls, and 40 others who brought male chattels, and carried them all to Judar's house, which they filled. Then he showed them to Judar, who was pleased with them, and said, Bring for each a dress of the finest. Ready, replied the servant. Then quoth he, Bring a dress for my mother, and another for myself, and also for my brothers. So the Jinni fetched all that was needed, and clad the female slaves, saying to them, This is your mistress. Kiss her hands, and cross her not, but serve her white and black. The Mamelukes also dressed themselves, and kissed Judar's hands, and he and his brothers arrayed themselves in the robes the Jinni had brought them, and Judar became like unto a king, and his brothers as wazirs. Now his house was spacious, so he lodged Salim and his slave girls in one part, and Selim and his slave girls in another, whilst he and his mother took up their abode in the new palace, and each in his own place was like unto a sultan. So far concerning them, but as regards the king's treasury, thinking to take something from the treasure, he went in and found it altogether empty, even as saith the poet. 'Twas as a hive of bees that greatly thrived, but when the bee swarm fled, 'twas clean unhived. So he gave a great cry, and fell down in a fit. When he came to himself, he left the door open, and going in to King Shams al-Dullah, said to him, O commander of the faithful, I have to inform thee that the treasury hath become empty during the night. Quoth the king, What hast thou done with my monies which were therein? Quoth he, By Allah, I have not done aught with them, nor know I what has to become of them. I visited the place yesterday, and saw it full. But today, when I went in, I found it clean empty, albeit the doors were locked, the walls were unpierced, and the bolts are unbroken, nor hath a thief entered it. Asked the king, Are the 2 pairs of saddlebags gone? Yes, replied the treasurer. Whereupon the king's reason flew from his head, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 620th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the treasurer informed the king that all the treasury had been plundered, including the 2 pair of saddlebags, the king's reason flew from his head, and he rose to his feet, saying, Go thou before me. Then he followed the treasurer to the treasury, and he found nothing there, whereat he was wroth with him. And he said to them, O soldiers, know that my treasury hath been plundered during the night, and I know not who did this deed, and dared thus to outrage me without fear of me. Said they, How so? And he replied, Ask the treasurer. So they questioned him, and he answered, saying, Yesterday I visited the treasury, and it was full. But this morning, when I entered, I found it empty, though the walls were unpierced, and the doors unbroken. They all marveled at this, and could make the king no answer. When in came the Janissary, who had denounced Salim and Salam, and said to Shams al-Dullah, O king of the age, all this night I have not slept for that which I saw. And the king asked, And what didst thou see? Know, O king of the age, answered the Kawas, that all night long I have been amusing myself with watching builders at work, and when it was day, I saw a palace ready, edified, whose like is not in the world. So I asked about it, and I was told that Judar had come back with great wealth, and Mamelukes and slaves, and that he had freed his 2 brothers from prison, and built his palace wherein he is as a sultan. Quoth the king, Go look in the prison. So they went thither, and did not find Salim and Salam, and returned and told the king, who said, It is plain now who be the thief. He who took Salim and Salam out of prison. It is he who hath stolen my monies. Quoth the wazir, O my lord, and who is he? And quoth the king, Their brother, Judar, and he hath taken the 2 pairs of saddlebags. But, O wazir, do thou enter him an emir with 50 men to seal up his goods, and lay hands on him and his brothers, and bring them to me, that I may hang them. And he was sore enraged. And he said, Ho! Off with the emir at once, and fetch them, that I may put them to death. But the wazir said to him, Be thou merciful, for Allah is merciful, and hasteth not to punish his servants, whenas they sin against him. Moreover, he who can build a palace in a single night, as these say, none in the world can vie with him. And verily, I fear lest the emir fall into difficulty for Judar. Have patience, therefore, whilst I devise for thee some device of getting at the truth of the case. And so shalt thou win thy wish, O king of the age. Quoth the king, Counsel me on how I shall do, O wazir. And the minister said, Send him an emir with an invitation, and I will make much of him for thee, and make a show of love for him, and ask him of his estate, after which we will see. If we find him stout of heart, we will use sleight with him, and if weak, we will then just do and seize him, and do with him as thy desire. The king agreed to this, and dispatched one of his emirs, Othman hight, to go and invite Judar, and say to him, The king biddeth thee to a banquet. And the king said to him, Return not except with him. Now this Othman was a fool, proud and conceited. So he went upon his errand, and when he came to the gate of Judar's palace, he saw before the door a eunuch, seated upon a chair of gold, who at his approach rose not, but sat as if none came near, though there were the emir and 50 footmen. Now this eunuch was none other than Al-Rahid al-Kasif, the servant of the ring, who was sitting at the palace gate. So the emir rode up to him and asked him, O slave, where is thy lord? Whereto he answered, In the palace. But he stirred not from his leaning position. Whereupon the emir Othman waxed wroth and said to him, O pestilent slave, art thou not ashamed when I speak to thee to answer me sprawling at thy length like a gallows bird? Replied the eunuch, Off, and multiply not words. Hardly had Othman heard this when he, filled with rage, and drawing his mace, would have smitten the eunuch, knowing not that he was a devil. But Al-Rahad leapt upon him, and taking the mace from him, dealt him 4 blows with it. Now when the 50 men saw their lord beaten, it was grievous to them. So they drew their swords, and ran to slay the slave. But he said, Do you draw on us, O dogs? And he rose at them with the mace, and every one whom he smote, he broke his bones, and drowned him in his blood. So they fell back before him, and fled whilst he followed them, beating them till he had driven them far from the palace gate. After which he returned and sat down on the chair at the door, caring for none. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 621st night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the eunuch, having put to flight the emir Othman, the king's officer and his men, till they were driven far from Judar's gate, returned and sat down on his chair at the door, caring for none. But as for the emir and his company, they returned discomforted, and tunded to King Shams ad-Dawlah. And Othman said, O king of the age, when I came to the palace gate, I espied a eunuch, seated on a chair of gold, and he was passing proud, for when he saw me approach, he stretched himself at full length, albeit he had been sitting in his chair, and entreated me contemptuously, neither offered to rise to me. So I began to speak to him, and he answered without stirring, whereat wrath gat hold of me, and I drew the mace upon him, thinking to smite him. But he snatched it from me, and beat me and my men therewith, and withdrew us. So we fled from before him, and could not prevail against him. At this the king was wroth, and said, Let 100 men go down to him. Accordingly the 100 men went down to attack him, but he arose and fell upon them with the mace, and ceased not spiting them till he had put them to the rout, when he regained his chair. Upon which they returned to the king, and told him what had passed, saying, O king of the age, he beat us, and we fled for fear of him. Then the king sent 200 men against him, but these also he put to the rout. And Shams ad-Dawlah said to his minister, I charge thee, O wazir, take 500 men, and bring this eunuch in haste, and with his master Judar and his brother. Replied the wazir, O king of the age, I need no soldiers, but I will go down to him alone and unarmed. Quoth the king, And do as thou seemest suitable. So the wazir laid down his arms, and donning a white habit, took a rosary in his hand, and set out afoot, alone and unattended. When he came to Judar's gate, he saw the slave sitting there, so he went up to him, and seating himself by his side, courteously said to him, Peace be with thee. Whereto he replied, And on thee peace, O mortal. What wilt thou? When the wazir heard him say, O mortal, he knew him to be of the jinn, and quaked for fear. Then he asked him, O my lord, tell me, is thy master Judar here? Answered the eunuch, Yes, he is in the palace. Quoth the minister, O my lord, go thou to him, and say to him, King Shams ad-Dawlah saluteth thee, and biddeth thee honor his dwelling with thy presence, in need of a banquet he hath made for thee. Quoth the eunuch, Tarry thou here, whilst I consult with him. So the wazir stood in the respectful attitude, whilst the Marid went unto the palace and said to Judar, Know, O my lord, that the king sent to thee an emir and 50 men, and I beat them and drove them away. Then he sent 100 men, and I beat them also, and then 200, and these I put in the rout. And now he has sent thee his wazir, unarmed, bidding thee visit him and eat of his banquet. What sayest thou? Said Judar, Go bring the wazir hither. So the Marid went down and said, O wazir, come speak with my lord. On my head be it, replied he, and going into Judar, found him seated in greater state than the king upon a carpet, whose like the king could not spread, and he was dazed and amazed at the goodliness of the palace, and its decorations and appointments, which made him seem as he were a beggar in comparison. So he kissed the ground before Judar, and called down blessings on him. And Judar said to him, What is thy business, O wazir? Replied he, O my lord, thy king and friend, King Shams al-Dawlah, saluteth thee with a salam, and longeth to look upon thy face. Wherefore he hath made thee an entertainment. So say, wilt thou heal his heart and eat of his banquet? Quoth Judar, If he be indeed my friend, salute him and bid him come to me. On my head be it, quoth the minister. Then Judar, bringing out the ring, rubbed it, and bade the Jinni fetch him a dress of the best, which he gave to the wazir, saying, Don this dress, and go to tell the king what I say. So the wazir donned the dress, the like whereof he had never donned, and returning to the king, told him what had passed, and praised the palace, and that which was there, and saying, Judar biddeth thee to him. So the king called him, Up, ye men, mount your horses, and bring me my steed, that we may go to Judar. Then he and his suite rode off for the Kareen palace. Meanwhile, Judar summoned the Marid, and said to him, It is my will that thou bring me some of the Ifrits, as thy command, in the guise of guards, and station them in the open square before the palace, that the king may see them, and be awed by them. So shall his heart tremble, and he shall know that my power and majesty be greater than his. Thereupon Al-Ra'ad brought him 200 Ifrits of great stature and strength, in the guise of guards, magnificently armed and equipped. And when the king came and saw these tall, burly fellows, his heart feared them. Then he entered the palace, and found Judar sitting in such state as nor king nor sultan could ever imagine. So he saluted him, and made his obeisance to him. Yet Judar rose not to him, nor did him honor him, nor said, Be seated, but left him standing. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale, till it be morrow.